Chapter 1541. Into the sunset on the last night before their departure from fallen grace, Sonny let out a deep sigh and listened to the spell whisper into his ear. Your memory has been destroyed. You have received a memory. With that, the transcendent charm he had been working on had become a supreme one. Its enchantment, which enhanced the material properties of objects, was further strengthened. Not only was the nexus of its weave more potent now, but the weave itself had also been made more robust to withstand the increased pressure. Strings of ethereal light were intertwined with the black threads of shadow essence, forming a mesmerizing tapestry. Sonny took a deep breath. 4 down, 1 to go. He had saved the hardest memory for last, the transcendent memory of the 7th tier meant for Nephis. That one he was going to have to alter on their way to Verge. Things were happening so fast now. Looking back at what he had experienced in the nightmare, it was hard to believe how close the end of it all was. It seemed like Sonny had been sharing the catch with Nephis and Anank just yesterday, but now he was approaching the finish line. Dismissing the charm, he rose and stretched his limbs, then left his quarters. It was night, but no one in fallen grace seemed to be asleep. While Sonny was passing by the windows, he saw numerous people crowding the streets on the neighboring island ships. They were all looking at the White Temple, knowing that their lady and the outsider warriors she had gathered were going to leave come dawn, or rather dusk. Leave to challenge the very source of the defilement. It was not an exaggeration to say that their fates depended on the result of their journey. However, looking at these people, Sonny did not feel that they were concerned for themselves. It seemed like they were concerned about Dusk and her outsider companions instead. Funny. Sonny could not remember the last time he had watched someone go into battle on his behalf. It must have happened occasionally, but he was usually the one doing the fighting. In Antarctica, he had carried thousands of refugees on his back across the frozen hellscape, which had seemed like a burden at the time. But in a sense, he would have been burdened watching someone fight and die for him more. So, he could easily understand the complicated storm of emotions brewing in the hearts of the people being left behind in fallen grace. He often complained about how harsh and unforgiving the life of an awakened was, but it was also a privilege. Consumed by such detached thoughts, he entered the hall where Cassie was giving the last orders to the people who would be ruling the city in her absence. Some of them he knew, like the captain of the soldiers or the carpenter who had been in charge of repairing the chain breaker, while others were strangers. All of them bowed respectfully when he entered. Lord Sunless. He nodded at them and approached Cassie, then placed a hand on her shoulder. A spark of energy traveled between them as the supreme charm was transferred from his soul to hers. Here, all done. The enchantment is substantially more powerful now. It also consumes much more essence, so be careful. She summoned the charm, which was shaped like a jade flower, and weighed it on her hand. Soon, the petals of the ornament ignited with a soft glow, hinting that its enchantment was activated. At the same time, the hilt of the quiet dancer glistened. A faint smile appeared on Cassie's lips. Thank you. Sonny nodded, then hesitated for a few moments. There were too many people around them, so he couldn't be too free in what he said. Still, he didn't want to remain entirely silent. Eventually, he removed his hand from her shoulder and asked, his voice serious. Listen, are you all right? Cassie raised an eyebrow, seemingly confused. Sure, why wouldn't I be? I'm better than ever. There was a rare hint of sincere relief and anticipation in her voice. Sonny frowned, lingered for a moment, then nodded again and turned to leave. In truth, he had wanted to use this opportunity to retrieve the shadow that followed Cassie around. But hearing that answer, he changed his mind. Keep her company for a little while longer. Who in their right mind would be relived in such a situation? Leaving the shadow behind, he left the hall and went to find the other members of the cohort. The night ended quickly, and the 7 suns rose from the waters of the great river once more. Fallen Grace was once again painted by the vivid radiance of the blazing sunset, drowning in its crimson splendor. The soldiers, all wearing their white armor, had formed a corridor on the streets of the floating city. Their gazes were solemn as they watched the 7 outsiders leave the temple and walk toward the piers. Separated by that living wall, the crowd of citizens was watching them, too. This time there were no cheers. Instead, everyone was silent, which felt a little eerie. Feeling the weight of countless gazes, Sonny was reminded of the docks of Falcon Scott on the last day of evacuation, for some reason. Back then, people had been desperately trying to get on the last leaving ship, knowing that everyone who stayed behind would die. Today, the situation was exactly opposite. The people staying behind were going to be safe. The ones who were sailing away would be risking their lives. However, the atmosphere was strangely similar. Desperate desire that could not be expressed with words. Fear, longing, and shame. Sorrow, grief, and pain. And hope. Hope was such a powerful and resilient thing. Unreasonable, even. It could bloom even in the most terrible of situations, bringing with it strength to go on. Sonny knew hope better than most, and hopelessness too. They reached the pier and boarded the chain breaker. Turning back, Sonny looked at the crowd one last time. Most of these youths looked unfamiliar. Even if he knew them from before, their appearance had changed now. He did, however, notice Chrono standing in one of the first rows, accompanied by a pretty young woman. Noticing him looking, the teenager smiled and waved. "This guy." Sonny smiled and waved as well. He even winked, making the brat look startled. "This is what we're fighting for, I guess, in a way." There was a little empty space in front of the gangway leading to the ship. Cassie's 2 deaf guards were standing there, looking up at her with lost gazes. She turned around and faced the crowd. This time, however, there was no speech. The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then addressed her guards instead. "Thank you, you 2 are free now." They were looking at her, unable to hear those words. She smiled softly. "Thank you for everything. Take care of yourselves and of each other." The 2 ascended seemed to sway slightly, then knelt silently. The woman let go of the hilt of her sword. The man dropped his silk cord into the water. Tears were streaming down their weathered faces. Cassie sighed lightly, bowed deeply to the crowd, and turned away. "Let's go. It's time for us to leave." Soon, the chain breaker departed from the pier and rose into the sky. They were flying into the blazing sunset, disappearing into its blood-red glow. Forever, and there it was. They had left on the last journey of this tumultuous, dreadful nightmare. For Sonny and Nephi's, it was especially poignant, because they had come from the far reaches of the future, and were now on their way to the furthest reaches of the past, where Verge stood. It must have been especially emotional for Cassie, as well, because she was leaving the city she had spent a whole year ruling and trying to preserve. Now, its fate depended on whether they would be successful in their battle against the First Seeker. In any case, she would never see Fallen Grace again. None of them knew if it would even exist in any kind of way should they prevail. However, it was inevitable for Fallen Grace to be destroyed should they fail. The blind girl did not look back. Instead, she stood at the bow of the flying ship, facing the setting suns. The others gave her some space, knowing that there had to be a storm of complicated emotions weighing on her heart. Only Sonny could see her face, visible to the shadow that was hiding close by. Cassie's face was not wistful or sad. Instead, it was full of resolve and determination, impatience, even. It was as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. Which was true, of course. Apart from Mordred, she had spent by far the longest in this nightmare. Sonny knew that he was sick and tired of the tomb of Ariel. The blind girl had to be feeling the same, but much more intensely. We've been here for so long. Sonny had come to Ariel's tomb, far away from here. He had spent time with Nephi's, come to care for and then lost Anik. Traveled to Fallen Grace and got to know the culture of the river people there. Fought against all kinds of underwater horrors on the way to Alethia's island. Withstood the insidious hell of the time loop. Dove into the depths of the great river and emerged from the other side. Battled against the defiled saints in twilight. It was hard to believe, but he had spent more time in the tomb of Ariel than in Antarctica, not to mention the Kingdom of Hope. Cassie, though, she had been here longer than even on the Forgotten Shore. And that was without even counting the unknown number of cycles the 7 of them had lived through before arriving at this one, hopefully the last. The chain breaker soared above the waves, flying toward the edge. Sonny spent some time enjoying the view of the blazing river, then rubbed his face and retreated to his cabin. There, he concentrated on preparing for the alteration of Neph's silver blade. Now that they were en route to Verge, he felt a sense of urgency and wanted to finish with it as soon as possible. A day passed in meticulous work, then another. On the 3rd day, they reached the duskward edge of the great river. It was much like the dawnward edge, but also different. The enormous, inconceivable waterfall was the same. The powerful current that threatened to destroy anything plunged into its crushing embrace was the same. The dark void beyond the edge was the same as well. But the light here was entirely different from the soft lilac glow of dawn. Instead of the tender radiance, the water here was burning with an intense crimson glow, almost like it was on fire. The inconceivable waterfall that stretched in both directions as far as the eye could see was painted vibrant red, as well. It was almost as if a sea of blood was spilling into a boundless, dark abyss. Enthralled by that dreadful sight, the members of the cohort gathered on the deck. The distant whispers of the falling water had grown into a deafening roar, making it hard to speak. So they remained silent. The chain breaker crested the breaking point of the waterfall and flew into the abyssal darkness, leaving the great river behind. Soon, the roar of the edge grew quieter, and then disappeared in the howling of the wind. They had returned to the dark abyss of the interior of Ariel's tomb. This time, however, their journey was going to be different from the previous time they had visited the boundless darkness. That was because, unlike the first time, the chain breaker would be crossing the space within the loop of the great river, as opposed to the empty space between it and the walls of the pyramid. None of them knew what exactly would be waiting for them there, but at least there was no threat of the terrifying swarm of the dark butterflies becoming aware of their presence, since they would not be coming anywhere near the walls of the pyramid, where the great monsters slumbered. They also did not know how long the journey across the empty space in the middle of the looping river would take. The last time, they had arrived back to the surface of the great river rather quickly, but that was because space itself behaved strangely inside the pyramid. Still, it was going to be much faster than simply sailing all the way to the dawn of time. They were going to reach the waters surrounding Verge in a week, 2 at most, if nothing unforeseen happened. Sonny studied the darkness for some time, feeling both wary of the challenge ahead and ready to face it. Then he gritted his teeth and went back to working on the silver blade. The mind-numbing complexity of weaving calmed him down, eradicating all unnecessary thoughts. Soon, this nightmare will be over soon. Sonny refused to think that they would fail. However, now that they were nearing the end of this dreadful tale, the thoughts that he had banished a long time ago were returning. The thoughts about the fate of Antarctica, of the refugees he had so desperately tried to protect. What was happening to the waking world right now? How was Rain doing? Was she healthy and safe, or infected by the nightmare spell and in the throes of going through her own trials? Knowing that he could not allow himself to get distracted at this critical point, he suppressed these thoughts again. He was going to find out sooner than later, anyway. If he survived. So what Sonny had to do right now was make sure that he survived, and that his friends survived as well. He had to fulfill the promise he had given and conquer this nightmare, at all costs. Just as it was in the black void beyond the great river, the space itself acted strangely in the empty space contained at the center of endless loop of flowing water. The chain breaker had been traversing the vast emptiness for a while now, at least a day or two, from how it felt, but Sonny was not at all sure how far they had traveled. All he knew was that the point of the great river from which they had left seemed far away now, while the point which they hoped to reach was not as distant. It shimmered in the darkness, both alluring and terrifying. Navigating the flying ship toward Verge was not very hard, because it was situated near the source. So, all they had to do was aim for the last stretch of clear water before the area of the great river shrouded in hazy mist. A long time ago, close to the start of the nightmare, Sonny had an epiphany that the strength of his allies was his own power as well. Therefore, he had become determined to increase the strength of the cohort as much as he could, in any way he could. He had been faithful to that determination up until now. Apart from the very action of gathering every member of the cohort from across the tomb of Ariel, that had mostly taken the form of arming them with powerful memories. Sonny had spent much of his time developing and improving his skill as a sorcerer for that purpose. Now, his ability to weave had improved tremendously compared to the start of the nightmare. Studying Anank's mantle had allowed him to make a qualitative leap in understanding of the fundamental principles of weaving, and by studying many memories in order to alter them, Sonny had improved his overall ability as well. As a result, Neff's Crown of Dawn had become a supreme memory. That was still his most valuable achievement, because that single memory was able to empower all the rest of the memories at their disposal. Of course, Sonny had not stopped there. He had also provided his allies with 4 additional altered memories. Kai, Effie, and Cassie now wielded them, preparing to use his gifts in the battle against Torment, the First Seeker, and the remnant forces of the Defilement. His help was not limited to memories, either. Whether on purpose or not, Sonny had also helped his friends grow stronger as individual warriors. Jet had received her aspect legacy and was now wielding the chilling mist blade. Kai had acquired the Dragonslayer attribute, which enhanced his body and elemental resistance. Nephi seemed to have regained her lost confidence. Her understanding of her divine aspect had deepened, and with it came the knowledge of fire, one of the boons of her mysterious aspect legacy. She was also a Titan now. Sonny had grown vastly stronger than he used to be as well. Not even mentioning his sorcery here in the Tomb of Ariel, he had mastered the 4th step of Shadow Dance and perfected the Shadow Shell technique. He had become a terror. 2 of his shadows had evolved, growing much more powerful. A version of him from before Antarctica would have been like a child in front of him at the end of the harrowing Southern campaign. But that version of him, in turn, would stand no chance against his current self. And somewhere between the two, there was a version of himself that Sonny never wanted to meet, let alone fight. The Mad Prince which had come and gone, changing everything. Are we ready? Still, despite all that growth and power, Sonny could not allow himself to stop until the nightmare was conquered, and the spell called for him to wake up. So, he threw himself into weaving, trying to finish the last alteration while the chain breaker was still traversing the black void. The process was not going splendidly. The silver blade he was trying to alter was a transcendent memory of the 7th tier, and possessed many enchantments. Its weave was inconceivably vast and intricate, and although he was not trying to change it entirely, he still needed to study every part of it in great detail. If anything, trying to isolate and transplant a single nexus was proving to be much harder than simply altering the entirety of a spell weave. The elaborate tapestry of essence strings was deeply interconnected. No single thread existed in isolation, instead crossing and touching numerous other threads. Much like fate, the string of a person's fate did not exist in isolation either. It touched the fates of countless other people, stretching from the past into the future, and thus influenced and was influenced by the greater flow of fate. But Sunny was nothing if not resourceful. Weaving strings of fate was beyond what mortals like him could achieve, but he could manipulate strings of soul essence with great finesse. Therefore, he could alter the weave of the silver blade to make sure that the nexus he was transplanting only burdened the pattern of a single enchantment, without breaking the balance of all the rest. He had to add new patterns in some places and cut the others down to match. Those that were cut had to be restored, of course, albeit taking a different shape. Slowly but surely, countless lightless threads of shadow essence became intertwined with the radiant strings of ethereal light. He had forgotten about all else, pulling on everything he had learned about weaving to accomplish his task. From his first tentative attempts at creating sorcery, back in the bloody menagerie of monsters under the arena of the Red Colosseum, to creating memories for the brilliant Emporium, to improving the soul arsenals of his soldiers in Antarctica and creating the siege souvenir to slay Goliath, to learning from Anank's mantle and altering the crown of Dawn. All the lessons he had learned were put to use, allowing him to create a lethal sword for Nephis. He knew that she would achieve incredible things by wielding this weapon. And if he managed to accomplish his ambitious alteration, every achievement she made with the silver sword would, in small part, also be his. Sunny, who had always been a fighter, was feeling a strange exhilaration as he worked on the complicated memory. It was the unfamiliar, but rewarding pride of a craftsman who was confident in the usefulness of his work. And then finally, everything was ready. Summoning 2 pairs of shadow hands, Sunny took a deep breath, picked up Weaver's needle and got to work. Time seemed to slow down as his 6 hands moved through the vast tapestry of glowing strings, snapping some and weaving new ones into the intricate pattern. Drops of sweat fell from his brow, but he did not pay it any attention. His expression remained calm and composed, utter focus permeating his gaze. Golden sparks ignited in the depths of his altered eyes, and his fingertips felt the slightest vibration spreading through the essence strings. From time to time, his skin was cut, but no blood seeped out of the cuts. He did not allow the pain to distract him either. Wondrous! Sunny felt exhilarated as he weaved sorcery. And then he felt overjoyed. Lowering his hands, Sunny let out a long sigh and listened to the spell announcing the destruction of a memory and the creation of a new one. He had succeeded. And now that he did, there were no more preparations to be made. All that remained was to reach Verge and use everything little bit of strength he had accumulated to destroy the first Seeker and escape this dreadful nightmare. After returning the silver blade to Nephis and failing to say anything meaningful to her, Sunny did not have much to do. He spent some time with Kai, Effie, and Jet, enjoyed a good night of sleep, and then assumed his usual spot under the branches of the sacred tree to meditate. Everything that could have been done was already done. They had prepared as best they could, at least he thought they did. Now, all that remained was to clear his mind and prepare himself mentally for the coming battle. Sunny and his companions spent the rest of the time. The chain breaker was traversing the empty void, clearing their minds and stealing their hearts. The battle they faced promised to be a dire one. But honestly, Sunny did not find it hard to calm his mind and get ready to face whatever it was that would come. There were only so many times he could feel nervous to the point of losing sleep before a decisive battle. He had experienced so many bloody clashes in Antarctica that anticipating another one had long become an ordinary event. Preparing for one mentally was not only a skill, but also a habit. So Sunny found himself feeling strangely calm. He slowly went over his experiences in the tomb of Ariel, consolidating his insights and shoring up his fundamentals. Rapid growth was most welcome, but failing to digest his many gains properly could leave him unstable. He had to eliminate all instability before reaching verge. Others were doing the same, each in their own fashion. While Sunny meditated under the sacred tree, Nephis practiced with her new sword, getting used to its weight and powers. Jet had found a hammock somewhere and was comfortably asleep in it. Effie was enjoying the snacks she had prepared for herself. Kai was practicing a strange, outwardly inefficient form of archery while absent-mindedly humming a song. Cassie was steering the ship, which seemed to calm her down. Mordred, morbidly enough, was inspecting his collection of bodies. Those of them that had belonged to Awakened each possessed their own unique powers, so he was probably coming up with plans of when and where to use them best. That guy is such a creep. Sunny shook his head and then went to inspect his shadows, which were created from the dead creatures he had killed. Not creepy at all, surely. Everything seemed to be in order. Everyone was ready. But before they could return to the great river, an unexpected event threw a wrench into their plans. Sunny was on his way to the bow when a loud boom resounded from below the deck, and the entire ship suddenly shook. Gritting his teeth, he immediately stepped through the shadows and appeared at the galley, which seemed to have been the place where the booming sound originated. He had expected to see some harrowing nightmare creature that had come from the void and infiltrated the chain breaker, or perhaps Mordred trying to kill one of the members of the cohort, but nothing like that was happening. Instead, he only saw Effie standing near the bulkhead, hissing curses. Her fist had crashed through the durable wood, splintering and cracking it. Her other hand was resting on her belly. Her face was pale and twisted by a grimace of pain. Before Sunny could understand what was happening, Kai and Jet appeared at the doors. Cassie was not far behind them. Mordred had not deemed it necessary to show up, but was definitely watching through the reflections. Nephis, meanwhile, remained on the stern controlling the ship. What happened? Effie lingered for a few moments, then turned to them and forced out a smile. The sight of it was familiar, but Sunny was unnerved by the dark, bitter look in her eyes. The huntress took a deep breath and said, her voice somewhat strained, I think that was a contraction." Sunny remained motionless for a moment, trying to comprehend the meaning of what Effie had said. Then his face fell. They had left fallen Grace so swiftly precisely because they hoped to end the nightmare before Effie was due. No one knew what would happen to her baby if it was born here. Would it be riverborn or an outsider? Would it become infected by the nightmare spell the moment it was born? Would it survive the return to the waking world? Because they did not know, they could not risk it. They had to escape the tomb of Ariel as soon as possible, and it had seemed like there was enough time. But fate had different plans. Even though Effie had not been pregnant for 9 months yet, the labor had started prematurely. Seen from a different perspective, though, she had been carrying her child for close to 2 years now. So, if anything, its birth was long overdue. Effie studied their frozen faces, and then looked down with a sigh. "Sorry, everyone." Sunny frowned. A moment later, he said in a stern voice, "What are you sorry for? Give that nonsense up right now. Also, please don't break the ship anymore. We need to traverse this bottomless abyss, so, it would be really inconvenient if it fell apart around us." He glanced at the other members of the cohort. Jet and Kai looked extremely worried, while Cassie maintained a calm expression. "First, I need to get Nephis here." Effie was a master, and her pregnancy was nothing if not irregular. Sunny had very little idea about how to deliver a baby, but he knew that having a powerful healer at hand would be extremely helpful. Nephis could recover from having her neck broken and most of her body vaporized. Certainly, Making sure that both Effie and the baby survived the delivery would not be a problem. Banishing unnecessary thoughts from his mind, he shifted into problem-solving mode and pulled Kai away. "Let's go, give the ladies some privacy." Then, glancing at Cassie, he said, "I'll send Nephi's down. You probably know what to do better than I do." But, receiving a nod from the blind girl, he led Kai away. Ascending to the upper deck, Sonny walked over to the stern of the ship and stopped near Nephi's, who looked at him with a silent question. He lingered for a moment. "Effie seemed to be going into labor. Go, they're waiting. I'll steer the ship." A frown appeared on Neff's face, and she left the runic circle without saying a word. Soon, Sonny and Kai were left alone. But not for long. Mordred had appeared from somewhere, sparing them a curious glance. "I couldn't help but overhear. It seems that a wolf cub is about to be born, huh? How exciting. Can't say I ever heard about a child being born in a nightmare. That should be a first, even among the great clans." Before he was done talking, Kai suddenly turned and raised a hand. It seemed as if he had wanted to grab Mordred by the collar, but managed to control himself, and simply put a hand on his shoulder instead. Kai's usually gentle eyes were shining, with a cold and furious kind of light. "You stay away from that child, Prince Mordred. I'm warning you." His clear voice did not contain the authority of his ascended ability, but it still crashed into the Prince of Nothing like a wave. Mordred stared at the usually charming archer for a few moments, amusement slowly disappearing from his gaze. Then he scoffed. "Who do you take me for, a monster?" He shook his head. "Well, all right, I might be a bit of a monster, but I'm not a fool. What do I gain from taking the body of an infant? Relax, Ascended Nightingale. We are all in the same boat, quite literally." Kai glared at him for a few moments more, then slowly removed his hand and took a step back, leaning on the railings. His expression was suddenly somber and pained. He remained silent for a while, then said in a lost voice, "How did this happen?" Sonny knew how he felt, because he felt the same. Nevertheless, he suddenly had a ridiculous impulse to start explaining the birds and the bees to his friend, just like Effie had done to him so many times. Steering the chain breaker through the dark void, Sonny chuckled all of a sudden. "It just did. Don't worry, with Nephi's there, it's all going to be all right." However, he knew that the delivery itself was not what Kai was worried about. It was everything else. Shaking his head, Mordred walked to the edge of the deck and looked into the dark emptiness beyond. Somewhere far away, the great river flowed, a long span of it shrouded in mist. Outside the mist of the source, Verge was waiting for them. He smiled. "What an exciting nightmare it is it not?" The delivery did not go smoothly. Sonny, Kai, and Mordred, of all people, remained on the stern of the ship for more or less the entire time, waiting for the results. Sonny at least had a task to keep him occupied. Guiding the chain breaker across the black void was not very difficult, but it still required attention. Mordred did not seem to care that much, but Kai was extremely concerned. He paced nervously, sometimes glancing down, but then hurriedly turning his gaze away. It was a bit strange. All three of them could learn exactly what was going on: Sonny thanks to his shadows, Mordred through the reflections, and Kai due to his awakened ability. However, none of them made use of that opportunity, preferring to remain in the dark about what was happening below deck. It was not like they did not receive any signs, though. The chain breaker seemed to tremble from time to time, and Effie's voice eventually reached their ears, penetrating the impregnable wood the enchanted ship was built from. Hearing the barrage of curses pouring out of her mouth, Sonny was a bit reassured. Things could not be going too terrible, considering that she had enough energy for such eloquence. At the same time, he felt his ears slowly turning numb. Some of those words he did not even know. Others seemed familiar but used in an entirely new context. Even after growing up in the outskirts, he was on the verge of blushing a little. Really, is there a need to be so descriptive? She has been chewed on by all kinds of nightmare creatures. How bad can the pain be? Nevertheless, the process continued for many hours. After a while, Effie's voice grew tired and his expression grew dim. It was taking too long. Even without being able to precisely measure time, Sonny knew that Effie had been in labor for longer than usual. It has already been a full day, at least, and there seemed to be no end to it. Nephi's Cassie and Jet were with her, handling the process. They would have called upon him and Kai if they needed help, but none of them had appeared from below the deck. Sonny was growing more and more uneasy, and Kai was entirely beyond himself by then. "Should we do something?" Sonny looked at him somberly. "Do what? There's nothing to do. Calm down. Neph is there, so everything will work out." Kai hesitated for a while, then nodded. It was hard not to feel useless. It was even harder not to feel burdened by the uncertainty of the future. They were going into battle very soon. The timing of it all was extremely unfortunate. Disastrous, maybe. This whole nightmare had been one disaster after another, starting with the dire necessity that had forced them to enter the seed, to begin with. And the man responsible for landing them into this situation was right here with them, yawning as he looked into the darkness. Sonny suppressed the desire to toss Mordred overboard, not because doing so would lessen their chances of prevailing in Verge, even, but simply because he knew that getting rid of the bastard would not be that easy. Letting out a heavy sigh, he moved the steering oars slightly and looked ahead. Time slowly passed. The intensity of Effie's labor only grew, while at the same time her voice became more and more fatigued. And then, after something that felt like several days passed, they finally heard a new sound. The shrill, loud sound of a baby crying. Kai let out a long sigh and simply sat down where he stood, looking completely exhausted. It was as if it was him who had given birth to a child, not Effie. But Sonny knew how he felt. It was indescribably strange to hear a child's cry in the black emptiness of the tomb of Ariel. A pure sound like that did not belong in this dreadful place. It seemed wrong and alien, and at the same time strangely uplifting. Feeling a profound sense of relief, Sonny poured his essence into the runic circle and slowly brought the chain breaker to a halt. The flying ship hovered in the dark abyss, unmoving, the leaves of the sacred tree emanating a beautiful glow. Sonny remained motionless himself for a while, then took a deep breath and left the runic circle. Glancing at Kai, who seemed too mentally exhausted to think straight, he shook his head and said, "I'll go check." He walked across the deck of the chain breaker and descended below deck, eventually finding his way to one of the cabins. In front of it, the air was heavy with the scent of blood. A radiant memory illuminated the gloomy interior of the corridor, and Cassie was standing in front of the door, her face tired. Hearing his steps, she turned her head slightly. Sonny stopped, feeling his heart beating rapidly. How is she doing?" A faint smile slowly found its way onto the blind girl's face, illuminating it beautifully. "It wasn't easy, but she's fine. They're both fine. Nephi's helped." He hesitated. "What about the timing? Wasn't it too early?" Cassie remained silent for a moment, then shrugged with uncertainty. "Everything seems fine." Then she suddenly remembered something and raised a hand. "Oh, can you lend me the endless spring? I was supposed to bring more water, but the nearest barrel is all the way in the cargo hold. We'll wash them off, and then you'll be able to see them." Sonny summoned the memory and placed it in Cassie's hand, feeling a storm of emotions raging in his wildly beating heart. What the hell? What is this damned nightmare even? "Right, sure, of course. I'll go tell Kai." He turned to walk away, then froze. "Oh, I forgot to ask, who is it, a boy or a girl?" Cassie smiled wider and then opened the door of the cabin, slipping inside. It's a healthy boy. Although Effie had gone into labor prematurely, both she and her infant son were all right. The worst fear of the cohort had not come true, either. Perhaps because the child had been conceived in the waking world, or perhaps because he was born in the black void outside the currents of the great river. At the very heart of Ariel's tomb, he was not river-born. At least that was what they surmised after cautiously setting the chain breaker in motion and observing no change in the appearance of the baby. It was an immense relief. Even Sonny, who always expected the worst and was usually prepared to receive painful blows from fortune, felt like an incredible burden had been lifted from his heart. The immediate danger had passed. Of course, the future was still uncertain. They still had to fight torment and destroy the first seeker. The child's life still hung in a fragile balance because it was unknown what would happen to his soul after the end of the nightmare. But somehow, Sonny felt hopeful. After everything had been said and done, the chain breaker continued sailing through the dark abyss. The members of the cohort took turns spending time with Effie and her newborn, full of contradictory emotions. The huntress herself had been exhausted by the prolonged labor, but was regaining her vigor and vitality at an incredible rate. She still looked tired and drained, though, when Sonny came to see her. Effie was in her cabin, sitting in a comfortable chair. She was wrapped in a blanket and holding a sizable bundle in her arms, looking at it tenderly. Sonny was actually startled by that gaze, unaccustomed to seeing his friend so openly vulnerable and strangely content. Hearing him enter, Effie looked up and smiled tiredly. "Ah, Uncle Doofus, welcome, welcome." He approached and looked at the bundle, finally laying his eyes on the newborn. Effie's child looked pretty much like all infants did, with the exception of the fact that he was entirely too large to have been born mere hours ago, at least twice the size of a normal baby. That poor woman. Sonny looked at the huntress with pity. Effie had always been unreasonably tall, and her son would grow up to be a real giant, from the looks of it. Internally, Sonny sighed. Another beanpole, gods, that brat is going to be taller than me in no time, won't he? Well, he might just grow up to be taller than anyone. That's a relief. Effie's smile grew wider. He's beautiful, isn't he? Sonny stared at her in confusion. She had really chosen the wrong person to ask that question. What are you talking about? He's absolutely ugly. All infants are. And don't give me that look, you know I can't lie. The huntress stared at him for a couple moments, then laughed and gently stroked the sleeping infant's soft head. Well, I think he's beautiful, almost as much as his mom is, eh? Sonny shook his head, wondering if all parents were a little sick in the head. Well, they had to be. Otherwise, what would make them care for the poor infants? A bit of unreasonable affection went a long way. He hesitated for a while, thinking about the little life in front of him. The infant, actually, it was not very convenient to keep calling him the infant. Glancing at Effie, he asked, "What are you going to name him?" She remained silent for a bit, smiling. Letting out a quiet sigh, Effie shrugged. "I can't just go and name him right away. I need to consult his dad first." There was a moment of somber silence, with both of them refusing to mention the fact that the baby's father was most likely long dead. Effie looked back at her son and smiled again. "Ah, but look at him. He looks like a little dumpling, doesn't he?" Sonny's eyes widened a little. "I knew it." He shook his head energetically. "No, bad, Effie, bad. You can't name your son Dumpling. That's a very bad idea." She giggled. Hee, well, I'll just call him Little Dumpling for now. We'll come up with a proper name after getting out of the nightmare. Sonny just stared at her for a while, then shook his head again, this time slowly. "Whatever, do what you want. Don't come complaining to me later, though." Effie gave him a mischievous look. "Sonny, you of all people should know better. I mean, did you mom not name you Sunless? And look at you. You turned out well. Her voice gradually turned doubtful, then she grinned. Actually, never mind. I think you might be right. Hearing her laugh, he hesitated for a moment, then asked tentatively, "How are you feeling?" Effie looked at her son again, her smile turning slightly solemn. Eventually she shrugged. "Like I've been run over by a pack of nightmare creatures, but don't worry. Nephi's healed me up pretty well. I'll be good as new soon." She caressed the infant's soft cheek and added, her voice hiding a somber undertone, maybe it's for the best. At least this way I'll be able to participate in the final battle. I've been drowning in self-loathing because of being so useless, you know. Now, either we survive Verge or not. In any case, we'll be together until the very end." Sunny frowned, studying her face. Her eyes were sunken, and her gaze was darker but, at the same time, fierce. It would be of great help to have the fearsome raised by wolves fight side by side with them, of course. "But, are you sure? What about your son?" Effie hesitated for a moment. "If we fail, he will die. So I'll hide him in the Black Beast locket, and do everything I can to make sure that we both get to live." She remained silent for a while, looking at the sleeping baby. Then Effie turned to Sunny and suddenly looked him in the eyes. "You know, Sunny, I once told you that the world we live in is dying. And I still believe that. No, I believe it even more after experiencing the last few years." A light smile slowly appeared on her face, and something fearsome suddenly ignited deep in her sunken, tired eyes. "But you know, now, I find myself in the mood to go and turn the entire world upside down. Maybe even tear it down completely and rebuild it from scratch if need be." She took a measured breath. "Just to make sure that there's enough space in that world for this little guy to live a life that is worth living." Effie looked at Sunny for a few moments and then laughed. "Someone has to, after all, and if we won't, then who the hell will?" The next day, Effie appeared on the deck of the chain breaker, carrying her baby. She was still recovering, and in truth, it would have been better if she stayed in bed for a few more days, but time waited for no one. Luckily, Effie was an ascended, and possessed a body that was much more robust than that of a mundane woman, or pretty much any other master, really. So, even though she looked tired and drained, her vitality was returning at a frightening pace. Perhaps she would indeed be ready to fight by the time they reached Verge. The chain breaker was traversing the abyssal void, with the radiant ribbon of the great river surrounding it like a twisting ring. The 7 suns revolved around it, making the inconceivable flowing realm shine. There were no stars in the impenetrable darkness of the false sky, but the light of the river was enough to illuminate the vast expanse of silent darkness. Holding the baby, who had just woken up, Effie smiled. "Look, that is pretty impressive, right? Nothing like a boring medical ward in NQSC. Leave it to a child of mine to arrive with such style." Frightened by the howling of the wind and the coldness of the void, the baby opened its mouth and let out a shrill cry. Soon, the sound of his voice drowned out the wind. At the same time, the leaves of the sacred tree rustled a little louder, as if concerned for the tiny human. Sunny stared at them for a while, then shook his head. "That kid is bound to have a very unique life, I guess." Sunny's own birth was rather unusual, considering that it had happened during a solar eclipse and on a winter solstice. But being born in a nightmare taking place inside a pyramid built by a demon from the corpse of an unholy titan, that took the cake. Of course, the 7 of them had to conquer the nightmare first, for Effie's child to have any kind of life. Letting out a sigh, Sunny went to keep Effie company. They traveled closer and closer to their destination. In the next few days, nothing much happened. Everyone was alert, afraid that the black void would be hiding horrors of its own, but it was truly and utterly empty. The members of the cohort spent time training, meditating, and hanging out with the baby. Sonny himself did not particularly see the charm. For now, the infant was indeed no different from a dumpling. All he could do was sleep, cry, and suckle on Effie's breast. There was little sign of intelligence in his eyes, and he did not really emote or react to anything. In short, the baby was ugly and boring. But being with her son seemed to make Effie very happy, so Sonny could not hold it against him. Everyone had their faults after all. Plus, while the infant himself was a bit of a letdown, watching how everyone reacted to him was rather fun. Kai seemed to be absolutely smitten. Cassie allowed herself to show her soft side, which had been hidden behind the mask of composure for so long that few people remembered what it looked like. Jet seemed to be in the same boat as Sonny, but she was also a bit intrigued by the tiny human. Perhaps she was holding herself back, though. Even Nephi showed some reactions, acting perplexed, bewildered, and slightly mortified when Effie forced her to hold the infant, which was a very rare sight and therefore precious. Mordred was not allowed anywhere near the baby, which seemed to suit him fine. He did, however, seem a bit fascinated by the whole thing. Motherly love must have felt alien to him, who had spent most of his childhood being raised by a sinister sovereign. Sadly, they did not have a lot of time to pay attention to the newborn. The battle for Verge was approaching, and so everyone was concentrating on that dire ordeal. About a week after Effie had given birth, the chain breaker returned to the great river. This time, they did not pass above one of the edges, landing directly in the middle of the vast flowing expanse under the azure sky. The sky was the same, the seven suns were the same, and the currents were the same. However, here at the dawn of time, the air itself somehow felt different. If the span of the great river where Sonny had first found himself corresponded to the present day, the age of the nightmare spell, then these distant waters, situated very close to the misty source, corresponded to the earliest days of creation, the age of gods, when the six deities battled against the remnant abyssal beings across the newly born world, aided by the living creatures they had created, as well as the demons. It was hard not to feel a bit of awe at simply being near such mythical times. It was also hard not to feel pressured. Not only because Verge was near, but also because this region of the great river was especially treacherous. There was only one place more dangerous in the tomb of Ariel, the place far upstream that corresponded to the world-ending Doom War and was the source of the time storms. The battles between the gods and the demons had been furious and harrowing enough that the great river was forever twisted by their echoes. But the battles between the gods and the abyssal beings that had escaped the sealing of the void must have been just as dreadful. Therefore, any traveler had to be extremely careful while traversing the waters near the source. And there was the risk of running into the defiled abominations, too. Soon after landing, the members of the cohort gathered at the bow of the chain breaker, looking at the distant horizon. Their faces were solemn. They had made sure to land close to Verge, but did not dare to approach it yet. Nobody knew what was the state of the defiled city, how many abominations populated it, and what torment had in store for the potential invaders. Therefore, they had to proceed with caution and gather as much information as they could, if they could, before coming up with an actual plan of attack. Nephi's remained silent for a few moments and then said, her voice even, "This is it." She studied the waters and put her hand on the hilt of her sword. The enchanted scabbard was the same, but the blade it sheathed was different. The longsword bestowed upon her by the great clan Valor had been destroyed in twilight and replaced by the silver blade, which was currently molded to a similar shape. That weapon was a reward Nephi's received for slaying Soul Stealer, a defiled saint who had once been a prince of the same clan. Whether there was some symbolism to one replacing the other, Sonny did not know. Nephi's turned slightly, looking at Cassie, and asked, "How long before we reach Verge?" The blind girl was the best at steering the chain breaker. the most familiar with the slate map created by the Sybils, and the one who had spent the most time among the river people. So, she was their navigator. Cassie lingered for a moment. No more than 2 days if we sail at moderate speed, more if we want to be truly careful, less if we want to abandon caution. Nodding the answer, Nephi's glanced at Mordred. Is there danger close to us? The Prince of Nothing had been a bit cagey about the particulars of how his aspect worked, but by now, they knew many things about it. For example, the distance at which Sunny could control his shadows as an ascended terror was somewhere around 24 kilometers. His perception was limited to what the shadows perceived, though. Mordred's dormant ability, on the contrary, allowed him to perceive the world through any reflection within a similar range, adjusted for the fact that he was merely a beast at the moment. It also allowed him to travel physically between these reflections. Considering that the entire Great River was one giant reflective surface, the Prince of Nothing was nearly omniscient in a considerable area around him. His awakened ability, meanwhile, was what made him so terrifying. The ability to enter a being's soul through their eyes and possess their body, wearing it as a costume. That ability, too, would make him a priceless ally during the approaching battle. Mordred remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head. I don't see anything moving. The current itself is a bit strange, though. It's eerie. We'll see it soon, an area where the water is a little bit darker than usual. I would suggest avoiding that area completely, as well as any other place similar to it. Nephi's looked ahead, then nodded. We will proceed at a moderate pace then for one day. Then, we will anchor the chain breaker and scout the approach to Verge before moving closer. She hesitated and then added in a steady tone. Be alert. These waters have to be brimming with the defiled. If we meet one, we can't let it escape alive and alert the others. We can't allow anything to see us before we see it either. You all know what to do. Sunny felt a little troubled. Since Nephi's was addressing a group and not him personally, her words were not equal to an order. Still, he felt a bit of a chill while hearing these words. But she was right. They did indeed know what to do. All of this had been discussed over and over again already. The cohort was prepared as well as it could have been, considering the lack of information about the state of the defiled city and its current ruler. Tormented. Sunny frowned. She had to know that they were coming. Why wasn't anyone here to welcome them to Verge then? All of them had expected to be ambushed by the defiled abominations the moment the chain breaker left the black void. And yet, nothing happened. What was the last plague planning? Feeling uneasy, he went about raising the ship's sails. They were going to sail on water for now to not be so easily spotted. The 7 suns drowned in the water, suffusing it with beautiful light. The impenetrable darkness devoured the sky, now that Sunny knew about the great swarm of monstrous butterflies hiding somewhere out there. In that darkness, the night seemed far more dreadful, almost impossibly so. But there were monsters hiding in the river as well. Before dawn came, the cohort clashed with several defiled abominations. Each of them was more powerful than the nightmare creatures they had usually fought upstream, and far more cunning. Thankfully, the might of the 7 masters was more than enough to deal with these solitary abominations. Although it took some effort, none of the defiled managed to escape. Those who tried were chased after and finished off by Kai, who was the fastest of them all. His arrows could strike true from a startling distance. As well, armed with incredible sight and a powerful bow, the archer was a deadly presence on the great river. Much more dangerous than the solitary abominations were the waters themselves. Here near the source, they were turbulent and unpredictable, often hiding fatal hazards. The chain breaker avoided the truly inescapable ones thanks to Cassie's intuition, and fought through the rest, protected by its enchantments and the sacred tree. Finally, the sky turned bright again. By the time all 7 suns climbed high, the first of the 2 days they had been supposed to spend traveling to Verge came to an end. At that moment, they planned to raise the ship above the water so that it would not be pulled downstream by the current, and organize a scouting mission to stealthily approach the defiled city. However, that plan had to be scrambled. It was because, unexpectedly, they had already reached Verge, or rather its foundation. Sonny peered ahead, his expression incredulous. His eyes widened slightly. These madmen, how did they create it? In front of them, the eternally flowing waters of the great river turned to ice. A vast landmass formed by it stretched as far as the eye could see, disappearing beyond the horizon, too great to be called a mere island, and somehow entirely unaffected by the current. Frozen in place, there was sand and lifeless soil covering the rough surface of the endless plain of ice, with rolling hills and dry riverbeds. Skeletal trees rose into the air, bereft of leaves or life. Here and there, mounds of black stone rose, forming a forest of twisted pillars. In short, Sonny saw something that he had never expected to see in the tomb of Ariel. Land. Everyone was more than a little stunned by the sight of the massive landmass in front of them. They had seen Verge from far away, while traversing the empty void. However, the ice and the pale soil covering it were indistinguishable from the flowing water at that distance. Nothing in the records left behind by the Sibyls indicated that the foundation of the city was so monumental, either. All that was mentioned on the slates, as well as passed by word of mouth between the citizens of fallen grace, was that the seekers of truth had established a city at the farthest reaches of the past, as close to the inception of time as they could, to serve as a staging ground for their attempts at reaching the estuary. So they had expected something similar to the fleet cities of the Sibyls, or perhaps a settlement built on a massive carapace of an enormous abomination, like Twilight. Maybe a levitating island like the one Alethea had created, or even a network of them. What they had not expected was an entire land of ice surrounding Verge. Sonny was both troubled and impressed. There was a whole day of sailing on the chain breaker left between them and the defiled city. That was a vast distance to cover on foot, at least for a mundane human, which meant that the mass of ice forming the foundation of Verge was truly immense. Which posed a problem. Sonny studied the lifeless landscape of the frozen land in front of them, then glanced at Nephi's. So, what are we supposed to do? Now that they couldn't sail further, there was a decision to be made. Namely, they had 3 possible paths, each offering its own pitfalls and benefits. The simplest path was to raise the chain breaker into the air and proceed forward, flying above the vast sheet of ice. This, of course, would offer them the highest speed and defensive advantage, since the graceful vessel was nothing less than a mobile fortress. It would be very hard not to notice a ship flying above ground, though, so they would alert the defiled of their approach long before reaching the city. The second path was to abandon the ship and proceed toward Verge on foot. That way, they would become much slower and much more exposed once the fighting started. However, it was much easier for 7 humans to infiltrate the landmass stealthily, remaining hidden until the very moment they reached the defiled city, or even sneaked past its walls, reaching the first seeker unseen. The third path was to circle around the landmass first, studying it in detail from afar, and come up with the plan of attack later. This was the most passive approach, but not the safest. The longer they spent in these dangerous waters, the higher the chance that torment would sense their presence. Nephi's hesitated for a while, thinking. "What are your opinions?" She addressed the members of the cohort, wishing to make use of their experience and intuition. However, the opinions were split. Some were in favor of leaving the ship behind and using stealth to approach Verge. Others did not trust the treacherous expanse of the desolate landmass and wanted to keep the durable hull of the chain breaker between themselves and whatever could be hiding beneath the ice. Sonny himself was undecided as well. He felt somber at the fact that he would not be able to use the shell of the onyx serpent in the upcoming battle, considering that Verge lay deep inland. However, there were plenty of other shells he could create, by now, including the giant version of his human body, and even though most of them were not as detailed and powerful as the great sea serpent yet, the versatility they offered made up for that. Overall, he felt that having solid ground beneath their feet was a good thing. He was sick and tired of fighting while surrounded by water, away from their natural element. So, perhaps not having the hull of the chain breaker to rely on was not that bad. Nephi's listened to everyone, then turned to Cassie, who had remained silent up until then. "What do you think?" The blind girl was not in a hurry to speak. After thinking for a while, she shrugged and said, "We don't need to decide right now. We wanted to anchor the chain breaker and scout the approach to the city stealthily. Anyway, all that changed is that we can do it on foot now instead of swimming and flying. So, why don't we explore this desolate place first before making the final decision?" Sonny moved slightly when she spoke. He threw a long look at the blind girl and then asked nonchalantly, "What is the best way to explore this place quickly, in your opinion?" Cassie hesitated for a moment, then said thoughtfully, "One person has to stay with the ship. The rest should split into 3 teams. One team will proceed straight forward, the other 2 will move slightly inland, and then move along the western and eastern shores of the island. Everyone will regroup back on the chain breaker tomorrow and share what they discovered." His expression darkened slightly. Nephi's meanwhile nodded. "Splitting up might be dangerous, but it's the only way to cover a lot of ground quickly. We can reduce the danger by making sure that none of the satellite groups strays too far away from the central one. That way, each team can be reinforced by another promptly, should the need arise." She remained silent for a few moments, pondering. Mordred should be the in-forward team. His ability to see through reflections will allow him to keep an eye on both satellite teams at the same time without sacrificing strength. He would also be able to travel between reflections to aid them. The second member of the central team should be someone who does not have a mobility ability. They could be transported through the mirror realm. She considered things for a bit before finally assigning each member of the cohort the optimal role. Mordred and Jet were assigned to the central scouting team. Kai and Effie would explore the eastern reaches of the frozen landmass. Nephi's herself would be exploring the western reaches, accompanied by Sonny. Cassie would be remaining on the chain breaker. It was as solid of a plan as they could come up with, considering the situation. The 3 teams were powerful enough to defend themselves, while at the same time being flexible enough to swiftly come to the aid of the other teams. The plan was solid. However, Sonny disagreed with it. Nephi's had offered a good plan, one that was both solid and flexible enough to hopefully keep all of them alive while accomplishing the goal. Each member was assigned a role that suited the situation best, making all 3 teams highly mobile and capable of defending themselves in case there was an ambush. Cassie, meanwhile, was the least suitable for swift movement and stealth, while at the same time being the most familiar with steering the chain breaker. So, she was the best candidate for staying on the ship. And that was precisely what Sonny did not like, even if he chose not to share his reasoning. By now, he was thoroughly confused about what he felt toward Cassie. Was he suspicious of her, or concerned for her, or simply acting paranoid, his thoughts muddied by the sin of solace? He did not know, but he did know that as soon as she spoke, his intuition raised an alarm. The blind girl did not directly volunteer herself to remain alone on the chain breaker, but she did not need to. As soon as they had decided to leave someone behind, she was the obvious choice. Instead of telling Nephi's to choose her, Cassie could simply let her come to the conclusion without anyone's help. And while Sonny was not sure about the reason for his anxiety, he was absolutely certain that Cassie had engineered this situation on purpose. For some reason, she wanted to send the cohort off and stay on the chain breaker alone. Why? Was it to lure them into a trap? Of course no. Sonny had already established that suspecting the blind girl in wishing to harm the cohort was preposterous. However, he could easily imagine her going on some stupid, self-sacrificial quest by piloting the flying ship into the heart of Verge and dropping it on the first seeker. Or maybe drawing Torment away from the city at the cost of her life to let the cohort win. Which was not to say that his imagination reflected reality. There can be any number of explanations for Cassie's subtle manipulation, from completely innocent to absolutely ominous. In any case, he did not like it. Which was why, after Nephi's explained the plan, Sonny shook his head. I disagree. The members of the three teams will be able to cover each other, true, but what about the person staying on the ship? Once we travel far inland, they'll be completely alone. If something happens, not only will Cassie be in danger, but we also risk losing the ship and becoming stranded with no way to retreat. Nephi's looked at him and frowned slightly. There was a silent question in her eyes, but Sonny pretended not to see it. Eventually, she nodded. That is a valid concern. Do you have a suggestion? Sonny shrugged. Yeah, I think I should stay on the ship with her. My aspect is the most versatile, so I'll be able to deal with all kinds of situations. That would leave you without a partner, though, so the number of teams should be reduced from 3 to 2, one team consisting of you and Mordred, the other of Effie, Jet, and Kai. He smiled. Mordred can use his ascended ability to transport both of you, while Kai can carry both Jet and Effie in the Beast Locket. Therefore, everyone will be much safer. Not to mention that Mordred would not be able to pull any tricks under Neff's nose, considering she was more or less immune to his awakened ability. Nephi stared at Sonny for a bit, a subtle hint of confusion hiding in her eyes. His suggestion was not unreasonable, though, so she nodded eventually. All right, let us proceed with that team composition then. There was no time to waste and no need to say anything else, so everyone immediately started preparing for the mission. Effie brought up the straw basket Sonny had masterfully weaved for her, cushioning it with a blanket. That basket was meant to be the infant's crib. Safely wrapped, the baby was going to spend the next few days on the idyllic and perfectly safe meadow inside Effie's supreme memory, sleeping and being visited by his mom or other members of the cohort every few hours until the final battle. That was a hell of a way to spend the first days of one's life, but such an arrangement was the best one they had been able to come up with. Eventually, the 5 members of the cohort, whose task it was to scout the frozen landmass, were ready to depart. Sonny watched them from the bow of the ship, not feeling the need to say or feel something poignant. This was not a farewell anyway. One way or the other, they were going to see each other tomorrow, either when the scouts returned, or when things went south and the chain breaker flew forward to rescue them. The ship approached the shore of the frozen island and came to a halt, hovering just above the water. 5 figures jumped from it, landing on the ice. Nephi's was first, wearing the Starlight Legion armor and wielding the somber silver blade, a unique hybrid memory of both the transcendent and supreme ranks, the result of the most complex and intricate sorcery Sonny had woven to date. The crown of dawn, which had survived the annihilating conflagration in twilight, was resting on her head, empowering all other memories around her. Kai simply glided to the shore. He was clad in the supreme armor crafted from the ivory dragon scales, wielding a transcendent bow of the 5th tier. Another supreme memory, a lethal severing arrow, was ready to be summoned the moment he had need of it. The cohort's resident dragon slayer was as deadly as one could be. Effie made a bit of noise when she landed on the ice, enveloped by her own supreme armor, the legacy of the Sun Prince, which made her look like a beautiful statue of polished steel. Incredibly, she seemed to have mostly recovered from bearing a child already. Even if there was some remnant malady holding her back, she did not show it. Flashing a defiant smile, the huntress summoned her spear and walked forward. Jet was right behind her, looking like she was born to exist in this land of ice. Chilling mist swirled around her, pierced by the somber glow of her cold blue eyes. Then, the mist flowed into her hands and took the shape of a sinister war scythe, its blade glinting eerily as it seemed to cut the rays of sunlight. Finally, there was Mordred, wearing his own ascended body. The Prince of Nothing did not have particularly powerful memories or insidiously lethal reflections to fight for him. However, he was perhaps the most dangerous of them all. An easy smile played on Mordred's lips as he followed Nephi's. The enemies of the five masters could only lament their fate. The five of them separated into two groups and moved stealthily across the desolate landscape, soon disappearing from view. Leaving Sunny and Cassie alone aboard the chain breaker, the five members of the cohort were gone, off to scout the approach to Verge. Sunny felt uneasy and worried about their safety, but not tremendously so. Each of them was a powerhouse in their own right, and possessed a wealth of experience when it came to moving stealthily through a region infested with nightmare creatures. Nephi's, Kai, and Effie were veterans of the Forgotten Shore, where humans had been at the very bottom of the food chain. Effie, who had hunted in the Dark City alone for many years, was especially proficient in navigating dangerous terrain without alerting anyone or anything of her presence. Jet had already been a frightening existence before the Southern Campaign, and grew only more tenacious after going through the disastrous months in the Antarctic Center, followed by serving in the military reconnaissance in East Antarctica. Mordred was by far the most slippery of the five, so even if Sunny was inclined to care about his well-being, the bastard was the last person in the tomb of Ariel he would be worried about. So the scouts were more than capable of fulfilling their mission unscathed. If anything, Sunny was more concerned about himself and Cassie. The restlessness he had felt for the past few months reached an apex, telling him that something was about to happen. The Sin of Solace was not shy about voicing his opinion either. "You've done it now, fool. What madness made you think that staying here alone with her was a good idea? It wasn't me, that's for sure. Now you are completely defenseless against whatever new betrayal she had in mind, with no one to cover your back." Sunny looked at him somberly, then turned away. Saint, Fiend, and Nightmare were still aboard the chain breaker, so the loathsome wraith was wrong. There was someone to cover his back. There were plenty. No, that's wrong. Why would he even need that? Cassie was not going to betray the cohort. That was just his paranoia talking. Sunny frowned, realizing that this state of his was a bit concerning. He had grown so used to the Sin of Solace that listening to the apparition's poison was already a habit. It had failed to drive him insane due to Sunny's robust mental defenses, but maybe the sinister whispers of the cursed sword were having some effect on him, after all. Then again, maybe it was simply the result of the incredible mental strain he had been exposed to in the tomb of Ariel. Is that how the Mad Prince started to slip as well? Feeling grim, Sunny filtered out the incessant whispers of the sword wraith and went about his business. Cassie softly landed the chain breaker on the water and brought it close to the shore of the Iceland, hiding it in the shadow of a tall rock mound. Sunny moored the ship, making sure that the ropes could be cut at a moment's notice. Then there was nothing for them to do but wait and remain on guard. While Sunny was consumed by alarm and doubt, Cassie seemed perfectly at ease. If she had been surprised by his sudden decision to stay back, which, in all honesty, went against how he would usually act, she did not show it. The blind girl remained at the stern of the ship, ready to activate the runic circle, and send the chain breaker into the air the moment there was danger. Sunny, meanwhile, was in charge of watching out for said danger. One of his shadows continued to keep an eye on Cassie, while the other 5 spread out to have a better view of the environment. He commanded Saint and Fiend to remain on the ship and sent Nightmare to hide in the shadows on top of the mound they were moored to. Hours passed in tense silence, with nothing happening. It was strange, really. Torment had been like a scarecrow in Sunny's mind. He had enjoyed the benefit of having Cassie around for long enough to know how potent and miraculous, albeit not applicable in a direct confrontation for the most part, her powers were. So, he was understandably wary of the defiled version of the blind seer, not to mention if that defiled was a saint. What was Torment's transformation ability? How had her other abilities grown, and what was she capable of? There were no answers, which only made Sunny feel more nervous. If there was one thing he did know, however, it was that the last plague would be attuned to fate and revelations to an incredible degree, which meant that she would have means of knowing when she was in danger. The arrival of the cohort was definitely a dire danger. They had already exterminated the other plagues, after all. So, Sunny had been fully prepared to fight their way to Verge through a sea of abominations. However, there had been no one waiting for them when they descended from the Black Void. There was no one laying in ambush at the shores of the frozen landmass, either. Even now, when the members of the cohort had split up into 3 teams, nothing appeared to attack them while they were separated from each other. Why was that? Was Torment, perhaps, unable to receive any visions of fate in the tomb of Ariel, just like Cassie was unable to see anything except darkness in hers? That would certainly make things easier. If Cassie was really unable to see the future, was Torment's strange passivity the result of the Mad Prince's schemes? Sunny was full of alarm and ready for something perilous to happen, but nothing was happening. That only added to his frustration. Cassie remained on the stern, acting like nothing out of the ordinary was happening. Hours slowly passed, and then the night came. The 7 suns drowned in the water, and the great river ignited with a soft, iridescent glow. Even the massive plain of ice shone dimly, illuminating itself with a pale, ghostly radiance. Bathed in that radiance, pillars of black stone were like a forest of colossal dead trees. Sunny remained on the deck for a while, looking in the direction of Verge and wondering how the members of the cohort were doing. After a while, he went to the stern and spoke with Cassie about taking turns guarding the ship. My shadows will wake me up instantly if something happens, so if there's danger, just keep yourself alive for a few seconds. I'll be there before you know it. The blind girl nodded seriously. Of course, go and try to rest well. There probably won't be a chance to do so after the scouts return. Sunny hesitated for a bit, then descended below deck and entered his cabin. Laying down on his cot, he closed his eyes and relaxed his body. He also controlled his heartbeat and breathing, making them as calm and natural as he could, pretending to be asleep. But of course, Sunny was not asleep. Instead, he was observing Cassie. If she really intended to do something in secret, and his decision to stay behind put a wrench in her plans, now would be the perfect moment for her to act. And indeed, after some time passed, Cassie did. What is she doing? Laying in the darkness while pretending to sleep, Sunny suppressed the desire to frown. Cassie had left the runic circle, picked up the guiding light, and slowly walked across the deck. As she did, a hurricane of white sparks rose around her, slowly forming into a humanoid figure. It was the echo of the defiled Sibyl she had received in fallen grace. The eerie thing had survived twilight, although just barely. Now her wounds were healed. Even her flowing red dress mended itself, as did her veil. The echo followed the blind seer, the hem of her red garment hovering a couple centimeters above the ancient wood. Just like always, her movements were too smooth to be the result of walking. Sonny had seen what was hiding behind that dress once, and he never wanted to see it again. Nevertheless, he continued watching. By then, Cassie had passed the sacred tree and was most of the way to the bow of the ship, near Annink's ketch. She did not, however, proceed any further. Stopping near the ketch, she silently gave a command to her echo. Soon, the boat was lowered into the water. The masts were affixed in their grooves, and the sails were raised. Gliding down with the help of the quiet dancer, Cassie took a seat at the helmsman's bench and summoned a different memory. It was a wooden staff she had used on the forgotten shore, one of the 3 memories from her first nightmare. The endless spring was now with Sonny, the Evertwine was with Nephi's, and only the staff remained in Cassie's own sole arsenal. Its enchantment was capable of summoning wind. Aiming the staff at the sails of the ketch, Cassie activated the enchantment and sent the boat moving away from the chain breaker. Sonny's shadow, of course, was already hiding under one of the masts. Back in his cabin, Sonny continued to pretend to be asleep. The night was silent, with only the sound of waves breaking against the hull of the chain breaker disturbing the quiet. The water glowed softly, and bathed in that glow, Annink's ketch was slowly traveling along the shore of the frozen land. Goddammit! Although Sonny was more or less certain that Cassie was hiding something, he had hoped to be proven wrong until the very last moment. However, he had been right all along. "You mean I was right?" The grating voice of the Sin of Solace sounded like thunder in the silence. Sonny refused to react, knowing that Cassie was most likely perceiving the world through his senses. As long as he kept his eyes closed and controlled his breathing and heartbeat, though she had no way of knowing that he was awake. Because she could only share the senses of those marked by her ability, not read their thoughts. That's the question, though, is it? The sword wraith laughed. Am I just a figment of your imagination, or am I more real than you give me credit for? If it's the former, then I am merely a thought construct and Cassie has no way of knowing of my presence. She said so herself, back on Alethia's island. But can anything she said be trusted? Because if she does hear me, then your little performance was just rendered useless. Oh, sorry. Sitting in the ketch, Cassie showed no sign of having heard what the Sin of Solace said. And yet, by now, Sonny knew that she was a remarkable actress. Her effortless switch between her usual unassuming persona and the magnetic image of dusk was proof. Could Cassie perceive the Sin of Solace, or not? If not, then how had she become aware of the time loop on Alethia's island? What was she trying to accomplish right now? He forced himself to remain motionless, continuing to observe her. I'll wait until she is about to exit the range of shadow control before taking action. Sonny could control his shadows from a vast distance. It was also the maximum distance to which he could travel via shadow step. So, as long as Cassie remained within that range, he would be able to appear next to her in an instant. And by remaining passive, he would hopefully learn what secret Cassie was keeping and what she was planning. Knowing that, he would be able to decide what to do. If she was going to leave the range at which he could reach her, though, then all bets were off. Sonny was not about to let Cassie put herself in danger, and just on the off chance that what she wanted to do could put the rest of the cohort in harm's way, he had to intervene as well. He had remained silent and tolerant of her for long enough. Today, on the eve of the decisive battle of this dreadful nightmare, the truth would come out one way or another. The ketch continued to sail along the shore of the icy island, surrounded by the beautifully glowing water. Up above, the night sky was impenetrably dark, hiding a numerous legions of slumbering horrors. Somewhere, not too far away, the abominable remains of Alethia of the Nine were sprawling through the city of Verge, waiting to be destroyed by the challengers of the tomb of Ariel, or infect their souls and bodies with seeds of corruption, making them a part of her defiled legion. Cassie sailed further and further away from the chain breaker, making Sonny feel grave. The sin of Solace continued to whisper into his ear, spouting all kinds of vile accusations. Finally, to Sonny's indignation, he felt the sailboat was getting too far away. If he lingered any longer, the catch would slip from his reach, cutting his connection to the shadow. So taking a deep sigh, Sonny opened his eyes and dissolved into shadows. A moment later, he stepped out of them inside the ketch, standing a few meters away from Cassie. She was sitting on the helmsman's bench, accompanied by her echo. Her face was illuminated by the soft radiance of the guiding light and the pale glow of the iridescent water. Sonny's face, meanwhile, was drowning in shadows. Letting out a sigh, Sonny looked at the blind girl and asked, his voice neutral, "Where are you going next?" After asking the question, Sonny sat down on a bench across from Cassie. There they were, alone in a boat, just the two of them, or rather the four of them. The sin of Solace landed on the bench next to Sonny, a sinister smile twisting his lips. His face was hateful, just like always, of course. It was also the exact same face as Sonny's. Cassie was sitting on the helmsman's bench a few meters away from them, holding the steering oar. The echo of the dead Sybil was there, too, side by side with her, since both were wearing flowing garments of vibrant red fabric. Traditional for the priestesses of fallen grace, they looked quite similar too. The most visible difference between them was that Cassie's exquisite face was bare, while the monstrous Echo was wearing a veil. Cassie's beautiful blue eyes were full of life as well, even though she was blind. The Sibyl's eyes, though, were eerily empty and devoid of life. Her hollow stare made shivers run down Sonny's spine. He felt that way every time he saw an echo of a human. Granted, this one was made in the image of a human who had succumbed to the defilement. The four of them sat opposite each other, surrounded by invisible tension. Despite Sonny's sudden appearance, though, Cassie remained calm. She deactivated the enchantment of her wooden staff and lowered it, then said in an even voice, "I thought you were asleep." A faint smile appeared on Sonny's lips. "Did you?" He had been reasonably sure that his small act had fooled the blind seer, but now that he saw her lack of reaction, a worm of doubt entered his mind. Had she known he was pretending all along? The sin of Solace chuckled, staring at Cassie with hate and disdain in his gaze. "It seems that you've been played like a fiddle, pitiful worm. Even after all my warnings, gods, how frustrating. You should have struck this traitor down long ago. Just look at her. She must despise you just as much as I do." The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched, but he suppressed the desire to rebuke the sword wraith. That, however, only gave the apparition the opportunity to press his mocking tirade. "You truly are a revolting creature, are you not? A lowly, despicable slave, and look, here is the woman who made you into a slave. She betrayed you once, and yet you allowed the snake to worm her way back into your good graces. You have forgotten her sins, and as gratitude, the blind traitor is about to stab you in the back once again." At that point, Cassie took a deep breath. Then she turned her head slightly, facing the sin of Solace, and spoke, her voice trembling with long-suppressed anger. "Can you shut your foul mouth, wretch? Who asked you to talk? Be quiet for once." Sonny was taken a little aback by that show of emotions. The sin of Solace stared at her vindictively, but did fall silent. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. Sonny smiled too. "So you can perceive him after all." Cassie's mask of composure had finally cracked, revealing an ocean of emotion raging below. However, she regained that composure in a moment and scoffed, throwing a contemptuous glance at the sword wraith. "So what if I can?" Sonny shrugged. "You lied to me, though, on Alethia's island, when you said that you couldn't." Cassie met his gaze without flinching. Her voice was even. "So what if I lied? Yes, I can perceive that insufferable wraith through you. I can also perceive your shadows and what they see. What about it?" He sighed. "Damnation." So he was wrong all along. Sonny had assumed that Cassie's ascended ability did not affect his shadows, since they were separate beings from him, and she did not have shadow sense. She had also never shown or acted upon the ability to mark his shadows. So Sonny had been fooled. Played like a fool even. He was still smiling, but that smile did not reach his eyes. So you were aware that I had been watching you for the past few months. She shrugged. Sure. If Cassie was aware that Sonny was suspicious of her, then the situation was completely different from how he imagined it to be. Not only would she have been able to hide her secrets from him, but even the things she had shown him had been shown on purpose. Like the chamber with the well, and the countless journals stored in a runic chest. Knowing that his shadows were watching her, Cassie would only be able to act freely if she was outside the range of shadow control. That was why she wanted to stay behind while Sonny joined the scouting teams. His pupils widened slightly. No. If Cassie had known that he was suspicious of her, she would have known that he would refuse to leave her alone on the chain breaker as well. They were too familiar with each other for her to fail predicting that action of his. Which meant that the blind seer's true purpose was not to remain alone on the flying ship. Instead, it was for the two of them to remain there together, away from the other members of the cohort. And he had done exactly what she wanted him to do. Suddenly, a hint of a strange and cold emotion settled in Sonny's heart. Was it fear? Yes, it was. It was the fear of fighting a battle of schemes against a powerful oracle. Cassie might not have been the strongest of them in a direct confrontation, but being caught in a net of schemes and manipulation that someone who could see the future had created was honestly nothing short of terrifying. Sonny deemed himself a master of deceit and manipulation. There was only one person he had met who could truly be considered a fearsome adversary in that field, Mordred. But now he was quickly reconsidering that statement. Actually, there was another contender among them. And that newcomer was perhaps the most fearsome of the three. Looking at the blind girl who remained calm and composed, Sonny leaned back and asked, his tone relaxed. So, why did you want to see me alone, Cassie? He lingered for a moment and then added, his voice remaining even. Or should I call you Torment? The words had been said, echoing in the beautiful darkness of the glowing night. Devoid of the wind, the sails of the ketch fell down. The boat slowly came to a stop, drifting in the current. Cassie remained silent for a few moments, as motionless as the echo of the defiled Sibyl sitting by her side. Then, she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of amusement. Should I call you the Mad Prince then? As Sonny's expression changed, she chuckled lightly. Gods, come now. I know that you only asked that question to probe me for a reaction, but how does it make sense? I'm not Torment. Sonny frowned, disappointed at the fact that he had not been able to get more out of Cassie. He was considering his next question silently when she turned to face her echo and said, throwing his thoughts into disarray. She is. He froze, stunned by those words. Then Sonny slowly moved his gaze to the silent echo. The red garment, the empty gaze, the veil hiding her face. How? Back when they met in Fall and Grace, Cassie said that she came to possess this echo after slaying the Sibyl who had succumbed to the defilement on the day of her entering the nightmare. The two looked alike, true, but both Sonny and Nephi simply assumed that it was because both the slain woman and Dusk had been Sibyls ruling the same city. The echo was too eerie and revolting, making Sonny unwilling to learn what was hiding behind the red veil. Therefore, he had never tried to look at the creature's face. The most he had done was glance at its weave, but even then, most of his attention had been focused on the artificial echo created by the enchanters of Clan Valor, the long-destroyed blade mannequin. Now, however, Cassie raised her hand and pulled on the echo's veil, removing it. Underneath it, An exquisitely beautiful face was revealed, one identical to her own, but devoid of life. The echo of the Sibyl of torment was hollow and expressionless, like all echoes were. There was a subtle expression on Cassie's face, though, a strange mix of revulsion, sorrow, and even a hint of tenderness. It was not every day that one chanced to look upon a soulless copy of their own dead self, after all. Gears were spinning in Sunny's head at impossible speed, trying to digest the stunning revelation of the eerie echo's true nature. Torment is dead. She had been dead all along. Of course, he had suspected that something like that was the case. That suspicion was a recent one, and had only entered his mind after they landed near Verge. Sunny could not accept that the fearsome oracle of the defilement was not aware of their approach. It would have been fine if it was just Mordred and him, wearing Weaver's mask. Both of them could hide themselves from divination. But the other members of the cohort had no defense against those who were attuned to fate, which made any attempts at hiding useless. Nevertheless, the chain breaker had not been ambushed as it left the black void. The forces of the defilement had not descended upon them once they reached the vast island of ice, either. It was as though torment had somehow been prevented from acting against them, or was not in Verge at all, which was strange, considering that she had successfully gotten rid of the Dread Lord and was supposed to be the new tyrant of Defiled City. He contemplated the thought that the Mad Prince had schemed against the last plague, as well. But the truth was much more stunning. Cassie had never received an echo for slaying the defiled Sibyl. There was no echo of a Sibyl. Instead, she had received this echo for slaying Torment herself. Cassie had killed her defiled copy long before Sunny and Nephi's even arrived at Fallen Grace. He shivered. Why keep it a secret then? Cassie studied the echo's face for a while, then sighed and turned away. After a short pause, she said in a slightly stifled tone, I suggest you don't look her in the eyes for too long. It's rather unpleasant. The Sin of Solace hurriedly looked away. Sunny slowly gathered his thoughts, still reeling from the shock. He was struggling to grasp the new information. It was too staggering, changing everything he had known about the nightmare. Eventually he asked, his voice even. When? Cassie shrugged. It was about 6 months after I became Dusk, I think. Of course, that was not the first time we met, just the last. Sunny remembered the chamber hidden under the Temple of Dusk, with a breach in its floor leading to the depths of the great river. Was that how Torment had entered Fallen Grace and come into contact with Cassie? Was that where they had fought, and where the defiled oracle died? But how could it be possible? How could Cassie have defeated a harrowing plague alone, despite all the time Torment should have had to accumulate power and information to prepare for their eventual clash? Staring at two identical, beautiful faces, one familiar and full of life, the other alien and empty, he suddenly felt very uncomfortable. Can you put that veil back on? He hated human echoes, and he hated to see the echo of one of his closest friends even more. Looking at the soulless copy of Torment was like looking at Cassie's corpse, which made him feel disgusted. The blind girl hesitated for a moment, then put the veil back on, hiding the echo's face behind it. Torment's empty eyes, however, remained visible, staring at Sunny without any emotion. Cassie sighed. At least she is at peace now. That is a mercy. Sunny shifted his gaze, studied her for a few moments, and then asked his next question. How? The blind girl smiled. How else? Of course it was arranged by the Mad Prince. She fell silent for a second, and then added, her voice wistful. By the Mad Prince and Torment herself, to be precise. The two of them, you see, were behind all of this together. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.
And